believe it is important to establish mechanisms to keep civilians in Gaza out of harm's way and provide them with humanitarian assistance. Over the course of his meetings, the Secretary pressed these 2 points, along with the need to secure the release of hostages and prevent the conflict from widening to every official he met. And when he returned to Israel on Monday, after his meetings with officials from other governments, he was able to deliver these messages not just on behalf of the United States, but also on behalf of others in the region who agree that Israel has the right to defend itself, but also want to see innocent civilians protected. The work we began last week is, of course, ongoing. We continue to provide Israel with the assistance it needs to defeat Hamas, and you will hear the President speak more about that tonight. We continue to work to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. Ambassador David Satterfield, the newly appointed Special Envoy for Middle East humanitarian issues, met with Israeli and Egyptian officials today to develop the exact mechanisms to implement the framework the Secretary negotiated with Israel on Monday and that the President cemented yesterday when he was able to secure commitments from both Israel and Egypt. Our work to secure the release of hostages continues to be a top priority, and of course our messages to other countries hostile to Israel, also other countries and entities hostile to Israel, continues to be clear. Do not enter this conflict. Upon his return to Washington, the Secretary met this morning with bipartisan members of congressional leadership on the Hill to brief them on the trip and what he heard while in the region. And over the coming days, he will continue Sam, I'm going to ask you not to interrupt over the course of this briefing. I will call you if you. I'll finish my opening remarks, but just to establish a ground rule here, I will call on you for a question, but I would ask in return that you not interrupt either me or your colleagues in the media. With that, and over the coming days, he will continue our diplomatic engagements on all these fronts. Matt?
Yeah. I want to start with something that is non-Mideast, just because I want to get it out of the way at the top, and that is the arrest in Russia of RFE journalists. Do you have anything to say about this?
I do. We, of course, have no higher priority than the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas. We are aware of reports concerning the detention of Alsu Kurmasheva in Russia. Whenever a U.S. citizen is detained overseas, the department works to provide all appropriate assistance. We have not been officially notified by the government of Russia about this arrest yet, but this is a case we have been tracking since May, when the Russian government seized her passports and prevented her from leaving the country. We haven't made the details of our work public until now because we thought it was not helpful to the cause to get her to leave, but this appears to be another case of the Russian government harassing U.S. citizens, which is why we continue to have a level 4 travel warning and encourage all U.S. citizens not to travel to Russia for any reason.
Okay, so when you say that they haven't, there has been absolutely no radio silence, at least so far, from the Russians about her case.
That's correct. And okay. I'll just say one thing about that. She's a dual citizen. Yeah. And as you're aware, the Russian government has refused, as often in the past, refused consular access when it comes to cases of dual citizenship. So we will be seeking more information about the case.
And now on to the Middle East, and I'll just have one, and then I have to go. But is there any update on the situation at Rafah in terms of getting humanitarian aid in and American citizens out?
So, as you saw, from the President say on Air Force One yesterday on his trip back from Israel, he spoke with President Sisi, and President Sisi committed to opening Rafah to allow the delivery of humanitarian assistance. Ambassador Satterfield met with officials from the government of Egypt and the government of Israel today in Israel to negotiate the exact modalities by which we can implement the agreement that the President secured. So over the coming days, I think what you will see, can't get into the exact timing, but we expect it to be implemented soon, details for humanitarian aid to go in. And of course, if Rafah Gate is open to allow humanitarian aid to go in, we will be trying to get out the American citizens who are in Gaza who want to leave.
Okay, thank you.
Can I follow up on that, Matt? Why is it only 20 trucks at this point? Do you have any firm agreement from the Egyptians to allow American citizens to leave via the Rafah crossing? Do you have an estimate on how many are trying to get out in that route?
So I will say, just with respect to trucks, I don't want to speak to what the exact agreement will look like, because that is a matter that continues to be negotiated, that Ambassador Satterfield is on the ground negotiating. The Israelis, as they have said publicly, and as Secretary Blinken said after we met with them for 7.5 hours to secure this initial agreement on Monday, the Israelis have very serious concerns about the diversion of humanitarian assistance. They're worried that assistance that goes in will be diverted to Hamas. We are working out an agreement to ensure that any deliveries can be handled appropriately. So we'll continue to work on that. But what we have said publicly and what we have said to the Israeli government is quite clear. We expect humanitarian assistance to be able to get in. We think it's important that the innocent civilians in Gaza who did not start this conflict have access to food and water and medicine. That's the commitment from the president on down. It's what Ambassador Satterfield is working out the details of even as we speak.
And what is being offered to the Egyptians to try to grease the wheels on this?
We're not offering them anything. We are telling them that we have an interest in getting American citizens out, and it is our interest, it is their interest, it is the interest of every government in the region that humanitarian assistance be provided to the innocent civilians in Gaza who are not a party to this conflict.
Just to follow up on what's been agreed, there's this talk about 20 trucks being allowed, about up to 20 trucks being allowed to go through the crossing. Is it sort of limited to that, and then the crossing will close, or is the plan to sort of open it indefinitely?
We want to see sustained humanitarian assistance going into Gaza for the benefit of innocent civilians. The exact discussions about how we implement that are exactly what Ambassador Satterfield is engaged in right now, so I wouldn't want to get ahead of those discussions, but it is our intention, our goal, and what we're working to secure is ongoing assistance to innocent civilians.
Why has it been so hard to get the Israelis to agree? You know, the UN is involved, the US can vouch for the fact that this is humanitarian aid coming in. Isn't it pretty obvious that 2.2 million people in the country, they're going to need more than this, but this is desperately needed aid. Why can't they just let it in?
I think the concern the Israeli government has, and they've said this publicly, and they certainly said it privately to us, is that any assistance that goes in will be diverted once it's inside Gaza. That there's not an Israeli military force in Gaza. There's not a UN peacekeeping force in Gaza. The people with guns inside Gaza are Hamas, and so Hamas may try to divert this assistance and keep it from getting to the civilians who it is intended for. We think that's a legitimate concern. We've made clear that this aid needs to go to innocent civilians and not Hamas. We're going to be watching very carefully how it's delivered because we want to be sensitive to those concerns, which we share.
So you don't have any way of making sure that happens, right? So
we are working on the mechanisms for the delivery of this assistance. Still in the region, Alex?
Yes, just very quickly on that. You mentioned Secretary will continue diplomatic engagements. I'm just curious, what is he hoping to achieve next couple of weeks and months? And does the Secretary believe that the ground incursion is something that Israel will not be able to back off?
So we're going to let Israel speak to its military operations. It's appropriate for them to do so. As the president said yesterday when he was in Israel, as the secretary said when he was in the region, both in Israel and in other countries, it's important that when Israel conducts its military operations, that it does so in a way that protects innocent civilian life to the maximum extent possible. That is the responsibility of any democracy. It's what differentiates us from terrorist groups like Hamas. And then your second question was, you had a second question. Remind me.
What is he hoping to achieve in the next couple of weeks?
I reversed the order actually. He hopes to achieve the same thing that we have been working on since the outset of this conflict. Number one, to prevent the conflict from widening. You've seen us as a government send very clear messages to other entities hostile to Israel, both through what the president has said, what the secretary has said, and by the fact that we have deployed 2 carrier strike groups to the region. We want to send a very clear message to other countries or other entities that they should not enter this conflict. Second thing we are trying to do is to secure the release of hostages. There are a number of Americans who remain unaccounted for. We know that some of those unaccounted for are hostages, and we want to secure their release. And then, of course, we want to continue to work diplomatically to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza for innocent civilians.
Can you please come back more on RFR report?
Yeah, sure.
Well,
I'll come to you next. Let me go.
Actually, you stopped. You said 2 carriers, strike carriers, Eisenhower and the Gerald. So let's say if Hezbollah decided to enter the war from the north front, you said there's a clear message. Will the U.S. be involved in a battle with Hezbollah?
I'm not going to speak to.
So what do you mean by your message?
I am not going to speak to hypotheticals down the road. But our message to any entity hostile to Israel has been that they should not enter this conflict. And our message to Israel and the Israeli people has been that we stand with you and we will support you.
Okay, one more question.
I'm going to get to everyone. People,
last
I'm going to
question.
work. Yeah.
The U.S. State Department on Tuesday raised its travel alert for Lebanon to do not travel, and also asked for the American citizens to make arrangements to leave the country as soon as possible. Do you have any additional information about the situation in Lebanon? Do you think it might escalate? And do you have why you're asking U.S. citizens to leave as soon as possible?
So we have taken that measure because we've seen events on the ground. Well, let me back up and say we are constantly assessing the safety and security of our personnel in every place where we operate overseas. We are constantly assessing the safety of the situation on the ground so we can give appropriate travel warnings and appropriate guidance to American citizens. We took the step in Lebanon because we've seen increased activity there that we thought warranted it. You've seen a number of protests around the U.S. Embassy, for example. And then earlier today, we issued a worldwide caution alert where we advised U.S. citizens that due to increased tensions in various locations around the world, the potential for terrorist attacks, demonstrations, or violent actions against U.S. citizens and interests, the Department of State advises U.S. citizens overseas to exercise increased caution. Jennifer,
On the matter of the American citizens, how many are unaccounted for? How many have been confirmed deceased? And has there been any progress in discussions to try to get them released?
32 are deceased. 11 remain unaccounted for. With respect to our work to secure the release of hostages, that work is ongoing. It's something we've spent a lot of time. The Secretary himself was focused on it while we were in the region, and others inside our building, inside our department, and others in the government have been worked on it. But I don't think it's productive to talk about.
Do you still believe that they are all being held in disparate places? Is there an understanding they may have been moved? Do you have a concept of who is actually
I don't
holding
want to
them right
offer
now?
a public assessment of where they might be or their situation.
Thank you. And with the worldwide caution alert today, can you just confirm if that's the third time that that's happened since that worldwide caution system was devised?
I don't know. I'll be happy to check.
And also, the director of this department's political military bureau, Josh Paul, resigned. It appeared that he felt like Israel had deferential treatment when it comes to arms sales to the IDF and checking individual units' human rights records. Is he right?
So let me say a few things about that. Number one, we understand, we expect, we appreciate that different people working in this department have different political beliefs, have different personal beliefs, have different beliefs about what United States policy should be. In fact, we think that's one of the strengths of this government. One of the strengths of this department is that we do have people with different opinions. We encourage them to make their opinions known. It, of course, is the president that sets policy, but we encourage everyone, even when they disagree with our policy, to make their leadership know. Secretary Blinken has spoken to this on a number of occasions when he said that he welcomes people exercising the dissent channel. He finds it useful to get conflicting voices that may differ from his opinion. He takes it seriously, and it causes him to reflect on his own thinking in terms of policymaking. But I will say, with respect to the specific criticism that has been aired, we have made very clear that we strongly support Israel's right to defend itself. We are going to continue providing the security assistance that they need to defend themselves. We think they have a right, not only a right, but an obligation to defend themselves against these terrorist attacks. I think any country would do that. But the president and the secretary have spoken to this very clearly, that we expect Israel to abide by all international law as they defend themselves. And we'll continue to work with them to ensure that they meet the highest standards.
But on a practical,
Go ahead, finish. Go ahead.
sorry, Matt, but on a practical level, isn't
Go ahead. Again, we're not going to. We don't do interruptions. Go ahead.
No, somebody has to hold.
I'm
Go ahead.
speaking.
Go ahead.
You're
I'm
a
speaking.
propagandist. You're not a
Hello?
professor, Matt, and I'm sorry.
I think your colleague is asking if she is asking a question.
Can you wait till I've asked my
Please
question?
ask your question, but he can't say,
You know what?
we
Are you
expect-
You actually don't get to tell other people how to
Every person in
answer.
this room?
No,
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
I know.
I'm telling
Decorum
you.
here. Let's have decorum.
You can't
Go
get
ahead.
away with that.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So, just on a practical level, does the military aid that goes to Israel, does it have the same vetting treatment as, say, for example, Saudi Arabia and Egypt? Like, does the Leahy Amendment apply to Israel when military aid is being vetted?
We comply with all applicable statutory requirements and regulatory requirements in our provision of military assistance to Israel, as we do to every other country in the world.
Can I ask a question, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Do you have any figure on the number of Palestinians dead in Gaza thus far?
I have seen the reported numbers. They're not U.S. government figures, but just as I've seen the Israeli reported figures.
It is close to 4,000 people that have been killed, maybe mainly civilians. What kind of protection is the United States willing to give the Palestinian civilians? I mean, obviously, they are told to move from one place to another, yet they are targeted. So you keep saying that you ask of Israel that to protect civilians. Have you seen any measure by the Israeli assault thus far where it has actually taken the protection of Palestinians into consideration?
We are working with the government of Israel. This is part of Ambassador Satterfield's charge, not just to get humanitarian assistance flowing into Gaza, which is something I've already spoken to at length, but not just to get humanitarian assistance flowing into Gaza, but also to establish places inside Gaza where innocent civilians can be safe from harm's way. That work is ongoing, but it is a high priority for us, and we are in discussions with the government of Israel about it, as well as the UN and other international bodies.
So do you agree with the Israeli call of the United Nations to evacuate 1.1 million Palestinians to go south?
I'm not going to speak to that specific question, but I will say it is important that Palestinian civilians have the chance to get out of harm's way. If Israel is conducting military operations in Gaza City or in other areas, it is appropriate to establish places where Palestinian civilians can be safe from military attacks, and that's what we're trying to do.
So you know that those who have actually gone south now going back north because they have been hit time and time and time again?
What I would say to that is exactly why we are working to establish these areas where they can be safe from harm.
I have a couple more questions. One on your veto at the United Nations that was cast yesterday. Why would you cast a veto on a call to end hostilities for a very brief time so you can get human assistance going through? All other members of the Security Council, with the exception of Russia and England that chose to abstain, voted for such a measure.
I would say a few things about that. Number one, we thought it was very unfortunate that resolution did not recognize Israel's right to defend itself in the face of these terrorist attacks. We think that is an important principle. I'm going to go back to what I said a minute ago, which is that Israel just suffered a massive terrorist attack, something that is 10 to 15 times the impact of 9/11 when you look at it on a per capita basis. Any country would defend it. Saeed, let me. I'm going to answer. I'll give you a follow up where you can make your point or answer your question. Any country would defend itself in those situations. The other reason we exercise that veto is there is ongoing diplomatic work about this very question right now, the work that Ambassador Satterfield is conducting, the work that others in the region are conducting to try to establish areas where civilians can be safe from harm. With that work ongoing and with a resolution that did not exercise Israel's right to defend itself, we thought this step we took was the appropriate one. Go ahead.
So, in your view, what is Israel's end game? I mean, what we have seen is an increased assault that ends up killing a lot of civilians, and that seems to be, the trajectory for, the next few days and so on. What is, in your view, what is Israel's end game, or what should it be? Because you obviously are in talks with them. You talk with them at the level of the president, at the level of the Secretary of State, and so on. What is their end game?
It's a good question. So I was just in with the Secretary, a number of meetings with officials from the government of Israel, including with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what they tell us privately is the same thing that they have said publicly, which is at the end of this conflict, they want a situation where Hamas can never again govern and run Gaza in the way it has. They want to ensure that Gaza is not a place where Hamas can continue to exist and launch terrorist attacks against Israel, which we believe is a completely legitimate and appropriate position that any country would take. We also, as the President has made clear, as the Secretary has made clear, to continue to engage with them on how best they can achieve that goal while protecting innocent civilians from harm.
So we're talking about regime change. I mean, just for the lack of better words, right?
You can call it whatever word you want, but they want Gaza not to be administered by a terrorist organization that is launching attacks that kill 1,300 innocent civilians.
I have one more question about the situation in the West Bank. Please, can I please finish my question? Thank you. I mean, thank you. On the situation in the West Bank, can you update us on the situation in the West Bank? Because since October 7 until now, 86 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli soldiers. There are fears that they are going to storm the camps anytime, like Jenin camp, whether these reports are true or not, and so on. But are you prepared for such an explosion in the West Bank?
So we have made clear that from the outset of this conflict, from the very first day, one of the things that we were trying to do was keep violence from spreading, to keep the conflict from spreading to other areas. So that is something we talked with President Abbas about when the Secretary met with him twice. It's something we talked about with other leaders in the region. It'll continue to be a priority. Go ahead.
Thank you, Roman. Can you give us an update on what happened in the hospital? Yesterday you said, the NSC spokesperson said, we are still gathering information. Do you have any update?
We are still gathering information, but based on our initial assessment, it is the assessment of the intelligence agencies of the United States government that the explosion at the hospital was a result of a failed rocket launch by militants in Gaza.
And if I may, I know it's too early to ask this question, but is there any diplomatic back channel? Are you talking to them? I know you are in contact with all the Arab leaders now, but is there any horizon for a political solution or something? How open are the Israeli now for that?
A political solution with Hamas?
No, for the aftermath.
I see. Look, it is something that we discussed with the Israeli government when we were there. It's something that the Secretary discussed with other leaders in the region. We are obviously in the very early days of this conflict, but it is something that everyone agrees needs to be a priority in ensuring that whatever happens to Hamas at the end of Israel's military operations, that something new be established, and I expect that will be the focus of a good bit of diplomatic work over the coming weeks.
You mentioned many times that you are working very hardly to not